Mediterranean is impacted by a series of cumulative impacts in addition to warming. There are not many studies that really quantify these impacts. That for this reason, we need to go beyond classic climate risk assessment and really score the impacts of warming based on publications. We need to assess the potential impacts of heat waves, the potential impacts of change in precipitation, change in stratification, on weather events, and other impacts that for which we don't have many studies or projections. And to do that, we need the expert knowledge of many experts all around the Mediterranean in many areas. That's why we interview them, we prepare a questionnaire, and thus with this information was translated in a score. That's why the tool used is not really a quantitative assessment, it's a semi-quantitative assessment, because it's not based in published information which we can take the information in numbers, but we interview people with a prepared questionnaire to get expertise in all these impacts in all the Mediterranean areas. The main objective of this study was to provide the scientific basis to apply adaptive measures to climate change in the Mediterranean fisheries. To reapply effective adaptive measures, we need to identify the risks, which are the most vulnerable elements of fisheries in which you can pinpoint to apply adaptation measures. To do that, we need a broad climate risk assessment that combines the different complexities of the fisheries in the Mediterranean, but also different complexities of governance, sociopolitical elements. That's why we developed this climate risk assessment, combining small pelagics and demersal fisheries, integrating experts on the whole Mediterranean Sea. In general, in the whole Mediterranean, the most relevant impacts were for sure warming, but also the climate extreme events, including both heat waves and extreme winter events, and also the changes in the stratification, which really affect the prey production, which is very important in an allelotrophic system like the Mediterranean Sea. The point with the Eastern Mediterranean is that the area where the highest rate of warming is occurring in the whole Mediterranean Sea. In addition, it is suffering for the influence of a lot of incoming non-indigenous species that is affecting fisheries and other anthropogenic impacts, which is making the Eastern Mediterranean the more sensitive to the cumulative impacts in the whole Mediterranean Sea. If we add to this point that the Western Mediterranean, particularly the Southwestern, has less adaptive capacities than the North areas, which makes then this area, the Eastern Mediterranean, more vulnerable because they have higher impacts and they have, comparatively with the rest of the countries, less adaptive capacities. In this study, what we did is was making a mapping of which were the most plausible potential adaptation measures to be implemented. So we were not able to assess the effectiveness, but we identify them. We identify for which impacts it will be useful, which could be the potential implementation consideration and the technical effectiveness. In addition, what we did is to map those measures according to different elements. So management options, livelihoods, potential policies. So we identified several measures. It's true that many of these potential measures are already used and in place. So we don't need to invent the wheel. So like, for instance, marine spatial planning, transboundary stock fish assessment, those are already in use, some of them. So we don't need to invent the wheels, we need to reinforce them. Others need to be well developed. For instance, providing policies to the fishers to be more diversified, to have more diversified fisheries, the added value of the products, provide policies to exceed the fishing activities if they need. So there are other options that need to be developed. So what we did was to put in a table, in a mapping, all of them in the whole Mediterranean to prepare the scientific basis to be used in the close future when the General Fisheries Commission of the Mediterranean start to develop a pathway, a roadmap on how to face the climate impacts and how to plan the most plausible adaptation measures. The organization in charge of really use this information is the General Fisheries Commission of the Mediterranean. Indeed, this work was done aligned with them. Many of the authors of this activity are members of public servants of FAO and General Fisheries Commission of the Mediterranean. So we did this work with them. The need now is to really move forward to implement, to use this information to develop a strategy, which is indeed part of the current 2030 strategy of the ENCM. So we did a work that is really demanded by the different countries around the Mediterranean, And indeed, some countries are really pressing strongly to really implement climate change in the management and assessment of fisheries. So this document arrived in the right moment to really move forward toward the next steps in the Mediterranean toward considering climate change in the management. The difficult point in Mediterranean is the stocks are really overexploited. Now in the last decade, this overexploitation started to be reversed considerably. So we are in the right moment to start to consider these other pressures, which is the climate change, since the stocks are starting to be in a better state compared to some years before.